And Mr. Herman Melton, a historian and one very familiar with the rocks and the history of some of the mines and quarry in Pittsylvania County, will tell you something about this area.
Bill, I'm glad to be asked, because this is Emery constitutes one chapter in my book, which is named Pick Tracks and Bateaus Industry in Pittsylvania County, 1750 to 1950. And this chapter on Emery is one of the most fascinating I found in the book. Emery, this is a deposit here, is one of the very few in the United States. And in 1917, when this mine was opened, this excavation here was one of only two in the United States. The other one was along the Hudson River in Westchester County, New York. It was opened in 1917, and therein hangs a tale, because World War I was raging at the time, and Turkey was our enemy as an ally of the Germans. And our supply of emery was cut off, because prior to that time, all of emery was being imported from Turkey and Mexico and other places. And so we needed to open up exploit some deposits here in the United States, and this is one of them, opened in the spring of 1917 on the Cates and Yates properties. There were 4 or 5 Pittsylvania County families involved in this: the Cates and the Yates and Hunt Hargrave. And also the Craddock family. But this is one of 3 pits. There are 2 more back this way that are not this large. But emery is a very important element. My fascination with it is that some industrial historians are now saying that emery should rank along with the barbed wire fence and those other things like, I suppose you might say, the steam engine, as important inventions, because when they invented the emery wheel, which they make from this, they grind it up and form it into a wheel or a grinding stone for cutting metals, and it will machine the hardest of steels. And prior to that time, till this was developed, the emery wheel, we were forced to rely on diamonds, which are very expensive. Right. And so scientists are saying, and historians, that this enabled the modern industrial age to come about because of the emery. So it makes
That's fascinating. Now, we told you a little bit before that emery has corundum in it, which has a hardness of 9, but the emery itself was assayed at having a hardness of 8. It's mixed in with magnetite and spinel and different other oxides of aluminum. And a very fascinating thing about it to me is it's so dense and interesting that in your collection or in your studies of rocks and minerals, this is a rock, because the spinel and the magnetite and are all mixed in a mechanical mixture, not interlocked. So it's classified as a metamorphic rock by most modern geologists, rather than an individual mineral. It's an aggregate of minerals forming this particular very hard rock, believed to be metamorphic in origin. But there probably, I guess, was an open pit mine, just by coming into the vein of the stuff, into the rock, rather than digging down to get it. And in my opinion, the dump should be down that end of it, but now I'm not sure of that. And
well, the dumps were mined, Bill,
yeah,
after this mine was closed. Wow. It's the last thing they mined.
Yeah.
They came and processed the dumps.
Yeah, now they're doing that with gold nowadays, because the value of gold made the mine dumps more valuable than they used to be. Yeah. It was pretty fascinating. And of course, after so many years, it begins more or less to cover in and slough off the sides, and unless you knew what was here from history, you really wouldn't know what you were looking at.
Well, it was classed in 1925, according to a local geographer. This was supposed to be the Pittsylvania County's most important element, important mineral. It was highly regarded in the 1920s.
Okay. And if you're collecting specimens, you can always put something like this in the trunk, if you can lift it.
One thing that's easy to forget about the location of this mine is the proximity of the old Virginia Midland Railroad, which is over here at Whittles. that depot is only about 2 miles from this spot where we're now sitting. And this emery was hauled out of here by wagon and teams and stacked along the road, and steam shovels and trucks hauled it from there to the Whittles depot. And it went out of here by train, and all of it went to one place. That makes it also more interesting. It was called the Niagara Emery Company in some place in Indiana. Took the whole output of this mine, and it closed down about 10 days after the stock market crash in October of 1929. So it went down with that stock market crash, and no more was mined after that. But there's still...
Did I hear you say that they did mine the tailings?
Yes.
Later on.
The last thing they mined was the tailings,
Uh-huh.
because they were getting the most easily accessible part at first, and that sort of ran out, I suppose, and then they went to mining the tailings. That was done in the late part of 1929.
You know, I'd like to say that if you come up here with our groups, from any of the school groups or anything, be very careful when you hit this rock with a hammer, because it's much harder than the hammer, although it is brittle.
That's
and
true.
The little parts of it fly like mad. You know, the diamond's the hardest substance known, and scratch anything we know. However, if you hit it just right, it'll break, it'll shatter. So you be real careful. This stuff can just put your eye out if you hit it hard enough. You have to be extremely careful. Should be wearing goggles if you break rocks.
No checks, you know.
Now, Vernon Guy, who's a stratiologist, more or less, who knows strata, could probably tell us very much about just what area this is in and why these particular rocks are exposed like they are.
He would know.
Pretty interesting.
Yeah. I wouldn't know why.
Well, I wouldn't either. I would. Well, you have to go way back to the building of the continent.
But I'm sure you'll find pits all down there.
According to the definitions you read of the occurrences of this particular metamorphic rock, was supposed to have been a deep-seated deposit.
Right?
Yeah, way down. So evidently peniplanation and wearing away has been for thousands of years.
I didn't realize that.
I'd be reluctant to say millions, but that's probably true. This is one of the oldest type rocks in this area, of course.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well,
That's Smith Mountain.
I'd like to see what that's like on the Hudson River.
Well, now, you know, that's associated with the basaltic areas that are very old. Some of them, yeah. Well, yeah. I've forgotten the name of that thing. But the Palisades are basalt.
Now, Bill.
Now, my guess is, in the old days, if you were walking through here, even a couple of 100 years ago, this exposed rock was probably here. And as you go down the hill there, and if you were to test the rock out, the emery becomes more concentrated and more pure than this. Most of this, if you break any of these rocks, you'll find they're quartzites. And this seems to be the basic gangue mineral. I think they spell that G-A-N-G-U-E. A gangue mineral that contains all of this other. However, the whole thing being metamorphic rock, it's really a shelf exposure of it. And since it's so resistant to weathering, I imagine that they're these outcrops that led them to the real deposit back in the old days. I could whack a piece of this. You can cut it off when you want. Now, from what I know, what little I know, this is almost pure quartzite with hematite. The pink is iron oxide, and there's a little bit of what they call limonite. And they said, hey, that's iron. So being interested in iron, they probably went around and took specimens and found that it was much more concentrated if they dug down the far end of this exposure. And there are many pot marks and many exposures, as Mr. Melton said, all along this hillside and for half a mile in that direction. So it must have been a rather large deposit. However, the pure good stuff was relatively in isolated pods. It wasn't like a big mine you could go down and dig it all. You just had to scatter and find where it was concentrated.